So I went to UP, which is Uttar Pradesh, which is meant to be this Modi stronghold, which he, almost wiped out the opposition last time round. And the fact that you could sense this shift was sort of quietly exciting. I mean, yesterday was wildly exciting because it just, the whole narrative was so shattered and it became nail biting. It wasn't, a lot of the seats were very close. And so, what had been assumed to be a straight third term for Modi, even if his vote softened, became a much more interesting and exciting story.
6:26, critics of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi say he's developed a God complex. Perhaps it's inevitable when you've spent years in charge of more than 1 billion people, but gods don't usually have to mess around with elections and coalitions. Let's talk about the results of the Indian election with Catherine Philp, who's World Affairs editor at The Times. She's in India as we speak. Morning to Catherine.
Hi, Stig.
We spoke yesterday and the results were coming in and it looked like Modi had won, which is presumably still the outcome, but it feels like it's not quite a defeat. It feels like a bit of a muted victory for Modi. Is that fair?
I think it's more than that because of the manner in which he's won, because he hasn't won in his own right. The BJP have not reached a majority on their own, as they have in the last two elections since he came to power. So they will have to rely on allies. Now, what's going on today is there's a bit of jostling whereby Rahul Gandhi, the Congress leader, is not conceding and saying that it's not implausible he too could form a coalition. I think that's extremely unlikely. Nonetheless, all the regional leaders are rushing to Delhi to speak to Mr. Modi and will be seeking to extract what they want from him, which is not a position he has ever found himself in any national or state government that he's served in. So I think the air of invincibility that has surrounded him and his God complex has been punctured quite dramatically by what happened yesterday.
And who has not voted for him that you'd expect? Has this been a rebellion of the poorer members of Indian society against his administration?
That's absolutely right. And those were people who in the past were had voted for him and, were part of the sort of populist Modi wave who bought into the way he sold himself as an economic savior and someone who'd restored pride to the Indian people, put them on the world stage. It turns out that, of course, really his brand of Modi-nomics, as it's known, didn't really touch those very poor people. I personally picked this up when I was in his own constituency in Varanasi about 2 weeks before the election, and I spoke to Dalits, who we know probably old-fashioned way as untouchables, and they said, there's no jobs and the prices are rising, and the Indian journalist who I was working with said, this is very unusual. These are usually Modi voters. So we sensed a shift there, as did a lot of people traveling around northern India, the traditional BJP stronghold, saw a wavering in support for Modi, not as strong as a backlash against his government exactly, but a bleeding out of that enthusiasm and that kind of messianic belief in him.
Yeah, how interesting. We're in the middle of our general election campaign, of course. Catherine, what was it like, the Indian election campaign? What did it feel like? How exciting was it? 1 billion odd people. It's probably the biggest democratic vote in the human history. As part of an extraordinary year of democratic votes. What did it feel like? Was it exciting? Do you feel like you're part of something when you're covering it?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly did in that. So I went to UP, which is Uttar Pradesh, which is meant to be this Modi stronghold, which he, almost wiped out the opposition last time round. And the fact that you could sense this shift was sort of quietly exciting. I mean, yesterday was wildly exciting because it just, the whole narrative was so shattered and it became nail biting. It wasn't, a lot of the seats were very close. And so, what had been assumed to be a straight third term for Modi, even if his vote softened, became a much more interesting and exciting story. I think that possibly everyone's enthusiasm for the vote was somewhat blunted by the astonishing temperatures we've been going through here, which have topped out over 50 degrees.
Oh my
So I
God.
think the whole country is pretty exhausted after 6 weeks of this. I was not here for the entire period. I've been here for the last 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks. So yeah.
You've done pretty well. 50 degrees. You must love democracy. If you're voting in a 50-degree heat, then that's a sign that democracy is alive and well.
Yeah, we talked about this same time yesterday with Rani Singh, who's a political analyst and journalist, author of the biography of Sonia Gandhi. Hi, Rani.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. So, what's happened since we last spoke?
The final figures came in, and the incumbent BJP government found that it didn't have enough to govern on its own for the first time in its decade-long tenure. So it's having to do some wheeling and dealing with key allies who've now flown into the capital and to start talks. Now, Modi has never governed on his own, so it's going to be quite interesting to see what happens. So that's where we are. The opposition hasn't actually conceded defeat yet and got to about 232 votes on with its allies. The BJP, the previous governing party, got to just around 293.
So,
Which is enough to form a majority. So the Prime Minister's tendered his resignation formally.
and so, what does this mean? Because I mean, literally yesterday, and certainly the weekend, people sort of, there was a discussion of whether or not they'd get a super majority, and now it's sort of falling really short. So, what happens now, and what would it mean ultimately for the millions of people who live in India?
Exactly. Well, the polls were wrong, essentially, and we were all looking at a huge majority. That's what we were told would happen, and as I've said, that has not happened. Um, this means that Modi is going to have to become conciliatory. He's going to have a much more collaborative approach, which he hasn't done so far. Previously, when he was governing during the whole 10 years, the allies that have now come to Delhi did attach themselves to him, but quickly left because of personal differences. This time round, in his speeches over the last 24 hours, he's actually mentioned the parties by name. Um, but they will want their pound of flesh. Now, these allies, India is a country of horse trading and has been for many, many decades. That's how these coalitions work. The allies know their power and they will want their pound of flesh. They'll probably want the speaker's chair. That's a bargaining chip and key ministries. As well as
We'll be interested to see how it all shakes down. Rani, really good to speak to you again. I suspect we shall speak again on this as the
it'll be
dust
very,
settles. That's great. Thank
it'll
you, Rani. Really good to speak to you. Rani Singh there with the very latest on the situation in India. Plenty more, of course, online at thetimes.co.uk.